Back at it and ready to go here with Red, Gold, and Bold. Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB, joined as always by Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. Of course, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, the data scientist, is with us, ready to break down the Kansas City Chiefs. Red hot, 6 wins. I know everybody wants to know, where are the Chiefs on Jeff Chadiha's power rankings? We'll get to that in a little bit because it's what we've all been waiting on, and maybe even compare notes with Eric Eager's power rankings. Let's start here, though, Jeff, with the defense. You have long been the guy that has been the proponent of defensive football. You've talked about the Chiefs' need for the defense to get better. It's certainly been much better of late, and even I can nitpick a little bit about it. I'm curious where you are. Is there anything left for this defense to prove?
Well, I think this week they're going to see the best quarterback they faced throughout this winning streak. And so that is probably the only big question left to answer for them is just how they can deal with a quarterback with this combination of skills. If you watched Justin Herbert play last week, he had a couple jaw-dropping plays, throws that were very Mahomes-like, and you have not seen that kind of quarterback with this collection of talent around him in this streak. So that's really the only thing. But aside from that, look, I have to say that I have been very impressed in the last couple of weeks. The way they played last week was maybe the best defensive effort I've seen this season from any team. And you know, the Cowboys did a number on the football team at the same time with a couple of defensive touchdowns off strip sacks. But when you're forcing 5 turnovers and you're taking the ball away at will and you were just constantly harassing a quarterback, that's the kind of defense you want to be playing in December and in January when we're talking about winning a championship. So I can't really fault them right now. I think that you look at what they put together on their defensive front now. The best way to assess what they've been able to do is there are guys on this defense who we were making jokes about a couple months ago who are all of a sudden playmakers. Last week, 2 weeks ago, it was Daniel Sorensen. This week, it's Mike Hughes. I didn't see Jaron Reed anywhere in a TV screen watching a Chiefs game for the first 2 months of the season, and he's forcing a sack, forcing a fumble that leads to a touchdown, returning the first play of the game. So, when you're getting plays, those kind of plays from guys who were struggling or not even factors 8 weeks ago, it speaks to how well you're playing defensively.
Eric?
Yeah, I agree with Jeff, and I think the biggest thing he said was, there's a couple things, right? Like, they had injuries at the beginning of the year, right? No Frank Clark for a while, which I would have joked at, but now Frank Clark's out there. I mean, if Frank Clark was on his deathbed, his last meal is a Colton Miller game, isn't it? That's his last meal.
It was the only thing. The only thing I could think of was how when Frank Clark has been down, you keep pointing out that his contract, his value in the Chiefs' eyes was based solely on how he worked over Colton Miller. And I'm like, oh my God, it is just his dream come true yet again.
I mean, it's honest to goodness. But he had 8 pressures the other day, right? He had 8 pressures. And and there's value, by the way, in the NFL in being able to beat up bad tackles and certain tackles, right? Because the league is littered with them. And so he's played well. Obviously, Chris Jones, he had 10 pressures the other day. He's come around on the interior. They finally figured that out. As Jeff said, Sorensen as well. And then it was getting the right players on the field. But it was also this past week, Fenton was injured in the previous week against when they were playing Denver. He was out. He was playing their best corner all season. So he was out. Mike Hughes, who had been benched, comes back in, plays good football. Then L'Jarius Sneed, probably their top 3 defender on their team. He can't play Sunday because of his brother's murder. And they go back with Fenton playing a part-time role in the slot. So a totally different role than what he was playing previously, to this point in time. And then they go with Hughes again. And Hughes has a career game forcing 3 turnovers. And so it's part like they got the right players on the field, and then things started to fall into place. And then now that they're dealing with some stuff again, which is injuries and guys being out, they're still a little bit resistant to being fragile. And so it's coming together nicely here. Now this week against LA, it's going to be tricky because Keenan Allen comes back. They're probably not going to have Rashawn Slater. Who knows about that? But the Chiefs are going to be without Chris Jones in all likelihood. Can they step up when one of their 2 or 3 best players is gone. That's going to remain the challenge. They could not in week 3. Can they, this week?
I'll take a shot at it, and I'll make Jeff look like the sweetheart, because I think the defense is playing very well. I have confidence in it, but the question isn't, are you a cheerleader ass kisser for the defense and going to say everything is fantastic, right? Yes, it all looks great. Magic 8 Ball would even say all signs point to yes, that the defense is very good. But, until we've thought we had a couple of spots where we're going to be able to say that's the final hurdle. And for whatever reason, something has occurred. Players haven't been in games, and you haven't been able to do it. You'd like to say, well, they beat the Packers. But as we know, Aaron Rodgers wasn't in that game. You'd like to say, well, they beat the Raiders. The Raiders look like, chum for the rest of the league right now. They are not themselves, or at least what they looked like early on. Cowboys had COVID issues when they played them. Amari Cooper was out. CeeDee Lamb went down in the midst of the first half. The Broncos, frankly, aren't very good, okay? Football team isn't very good, if you want to go all the way back to that one. We still haven't seen one of the NFL's elite get slapped around by this defense. Not that, that always happens. Like, sometimes you play the NFL's elite, and it's 27-24, and, it's just a war, and it comes down to the very end. But I do think that you're not being unfair, and I think if you're the Chiefs, this should be something that fuels them, because I think there should still be maybe just a little bit in the back of their mind that we still have things to prove, right? Like, and hopefully that works as a motivator for the football team. But they haven't slapped around a really great offense that was hitting on all cylinders. Now, that's not their fault, and they're not to be villainized for it. It's just, if you were keeping a scorecard, you can't go, here came in the Cowboys humming at 40 a game, and they held them to 9. Or here came, the Packers with Aaron Rodgers headed towards another MVP, and they held them to 16. There isn't one of those games yet on the resume. Do they need that to fully be validated, Jeff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I think the danger in what's happened against the Raiders, and you make a good point, is that the Raiders just don't match up well with the Chiefs this year. For whatever reason, you're talking about a team that they saw twice and scored 89 points against and gave up 23 points. And everybody else in this stretch, the Chiefs couldn't get more than 22 points against. And so whatever the Raiders are doing over there, it's probably going to cost some people some jobs when it comes to evaluating how they deal with the best team in the AFC West for the last 5 years. So, yeah, I do think you don't want to do that, because there's other teams that have had big wins. Like the Colts beat up on the Bills 41-10. The Chiefs lost to the Bills 38-20. The Patriots beat the Browns 45-7. The Chargers lost to the Ravens 34-6. If you want to go through the entire NFL season, you're going to find these kind of games happening. And what you don't want to do is place too much emphasis on what they mean long term. When I watched the Bucs-Bills game last week, when I watched the Packers playing against the Bears, those are the kind of offenses that you're going to have to beat in the playoffs to win a championship. At some point, you're going to see those kind of teams. And yeah, it's hard to gauge where the Chiefs are against those offenses without having something close to that. And I don't even know what is close to that right now, except for maybe the Chargers in week 3, the Ravens when they were a little healthier. They lost that game when those were close battles. But without that, it does matter who's on the field when you're playing against them. And I think the Chiefs are smart enough to know that. I don't think they're going to sit here and puff out their chest and say we beat up on the Packers without Aaron Rodgers, or the Cowboys with a couple big receivers down. I think they know they still have more to do.
Yeah. I think they're a team that so far this year, they're the rare team that hasn't beaten a team that they shouldn't have beaten and lost to his team. Like they have losses to teams they shouldn't have lost to, I guess, from the betting market standpoint, but they haven't lost to a bad team. You know what I mean? Yeah, especially if you look at like the time that they played him. As Jeff said, Baltimore, I think right now 1 through 50 or 2 through 53, Baltimore's not a great team anymore. But back then they were fine. Obviously the Chargers, they've had some games too, but that was not a great loss, but it also wasn't embarrassing. And then Bills and Titans, they were smacked by them, but those teams at the time were also great, right? Like Chiefs haven't had a stinker, and I think that that plays to what Andy Reid's been as a member of the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Like this is the 9th consecutive year that they've had more than a winning season with him, and a lot of that's due to the rarity of games where they just lose to bad teams. But I do think that the question remains: can they beat a team that's, better than them? And I think it's weird because right now, the Chiefs are 5-1 to win the Super Bowl. That's tied with Tampa Bay for the highest odds in the NFL. Like right now, the market would maybe make Tampa Bay better than them. So they might not even get to answer that question this year.
Yeah. L'Jarius Sneed, they overcome him, the tragedy with his family. And of course, like I think all Chiefs fans, thinking about him and his family, and that's first, and just a horrible story. I'd encourage everybody to read Sam McDowell's great piece in the Kansas City Star, where he really detailed the relationship of those two. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, he wrote this piece, and it was absolutely fantastic, and just speaks to how tragic this situation is. On the football field, they had to play without him, and they did a pretty good job. Jeff, you're the defensive back. Why did it work so well? What did Steve Spagnuolo do that made him so effective without him?
It's called a pass rush. You don't have to worry so much about the back end of your defense if your defensive tackles or defensive ends are living in the other team's backfield, and that's really what you saw. Every down in that game was Derek Carr didn't have a lot of time to throw. Didn't have many places to throw to. What Steve Spagnuolo has always done well, and what his calling card has been, is just disguising coverages. That's what he does to create opportunities for that pass rush to get home. It's, I always feel like I'm bashing the Chiefs cornerbacks when I say this, but I think Eric can relate being a receiver. There's a big difference between a defensive back who can just shut you down, who can just Marlon Humphrey you, Deion Sanders you, Trey Davis White you, and somebody who plays very well within the scheme of the system. I think L'Jarius Sneed is the kind of player who plays very well within this system. Charvarius Ward is that kind of player. Rashard Fenton is that kind of player. Bashad Breeland was that kind of player. And so I don't think it's as hard to lose a player of that caliber. Doesn't mean he's not a great player. Richard Sherman's a great player. You're not going to lock him out on people, for an entire game and to have success doing that. But I think he plays well within their system. And so, look, they got a snowball running downhill against the Raiders from the first play of that game on. And so, again, you're not hearing Mike Hughes' name being called very often anymore. You're not hearing Daniel Sorensen's name being called very often anymore for the same reasons, because with that pass rush, you don't have to worry about who's covering people. You don't have to worry about just who's getting the credit for all the sacks and the hurries.
Yeah. And the pass rush has been a big part of it. And that brings us to Chris Jones and likely not playing. Rashawn Slater not going to play for the Chargers, which makes a bigger impact on that game.
Is this for Eric or me?
Let's start with you, and then we'll go to Eric.
Okay. Because I've thought about this a lot. I think it's Rashawn Slater. I just feel like the Chiefs, with Melvin Ingram being there, I think having that extra presence on the defensive line gives them a little more comfort. It's gonna affect them because Chris Jones is their LeBron James on that defense. He's the guy who is making everybody look a lot better because he's an interior. But I don't know what they have outside of Rashawn Slater. They're talking about Trey Pipkins, a guy who's played sparingly. That's not going to make up for a player who's probably going to be an all-rookie player, probably end up being a Pro Bowl left tackle in this league the way he started out. I actually know his dad, by the way. He played basketball at Wyoming when I was in school there, so I know the athletic ability in the family genes. And a big reason why Justin Herbert's been playing at a high level, especially over the last couple of weeks, is that he's not getting pressured, in the way he has been in some of the losses he's had. So, yeah, I think Rashawn Slater, without him being there, you have Frank Clark licking his chops, thinking another Colt Miller sandwich is coming his way this coming week.
There's nothing better than a
right.
Miller sandwich.
That's right. Extra combo meal.
Yeah. What does it do? Who gets the advantage if both these players are out, Eric?
I think it's going to be. I think that the Chiefs are going to struggle more without Jones than the Chargers without Slater.
Why?
Because Jones is Slater's great. Don't get me wrong. And I do think Frank Clark will beat up on a backup left tackle, but I just think Chris Jones is such an outlier at his position in the NFL. He's such a disruptive piece. And I think that the Chargers, so we watch the Chargers offense and we're like, oh my goodness, this thing, look at how great Herbert is and all this stuff. And I agree that he's a transcendent talent. There's one thing about this team though, guys, that I if I was a backer of the Chargers, I'd be worried about. I'm going to relate it to the Chiefs. The Chiefs, 8.3% of their targets are contested, right? In other words, and we've seen this, by the way, it's funny. The only person that can screw up a Chiefs pass on 92% of the passes is the Chiefs. Drops, missed throws, etc. 20% of Chargers passes are contested, meaning that there's 80% of passes. Yes, it's the throw, it's the catch, but it's double the rate of what the Chiefs are at. And it's fifth worst in the NFL. And when we come up for error every once in a while, and we're like, oh, why are the Chargers only scoring 20 in this game or 13 against the Denver Broncos or whatever, blah, 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 right? And I think that's the hidden one where, there's that little itty bitty contested play there. And that's why I think them getting Allen back is big. But they really only have two wide receivers that I would consider like NFL starting caliber. Whereas, and again, this is so hilarious after the first month of the season, but the Chiefs have such good depth in the secondary that almost makes me like, I wish that Chris Jones was there for for Justin Herbert to pat the ball just a millisecond and for Chris Jones to eat him alive. And I think Frank Clark can do that, but I think Chris Jones would be the one to capitalize on that better. And I think of those two players, he's obviously the more elite one.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's clear, and I mentioned this on the radio show, and I think it was with you, Eric, when you were on, the Chiefs team, maybe not, maybe it was with Timmy, that the Chiefs defensive line is greater as the sum of its parts, right? Like, credit Steve Spagnuolo, credit the personnel department. Melvin Ingram, you can be like, oh, well, Melvin Ingram's great. Really? Then why was he on a one-year deal? Right. And then you say, well, he's 33. And so you don't have to give those guys, right? Because no one's really sure what you're going to get from a 33-year-old defensive end. But he's been exactly what you'd want, a salty veteran, that knows all the tricks, knows how to play the game, plays it right. And is frankly about, I think, winning a championship, which means he'll be completely selfless in how he does things. There's no need for glory. And he could, and that's not always true because he could be on a salary drive because he's on a one-year deal, but he's not. Frank Clark, in all likelihood, I mean, he's got to know that he's in his last year with the Chiefs, or at least in his last year making this kind of money. Now, maybe he's playing his way into some kind of reconstructed contract that keeps him hanging around. So there's incentive there, but he's playing great football. But when you take one of those pieces out, right, because we've seen what that looks like, does the whole thing fall like a house of cards, right? How interdependent are they? Chris Jones being the biggest piece, right? The foundational piece. He's clearly the best one of the bunch. How much does the rest of it all suffer when Chris Jones isn't there drawing attention, Jeff?
Well, it's a huge change. And, Eric said it best. It's like I don't even know if we give Chris Jones enough credit around here for what he's become. I mean, you watched Aaron Donald last night against the Arizona Cardinals. You saw the impact he had on that game just because that's what he does. And Chris Jones, when he's playing at that kind of a level and super highly motivated to do damage, he just wrecks game plans. And so, yeah, I do feel like he has made the people around him better. I don't know if Frank Clark, certainly not Jaron Reed. I mean, Jaron Reed was invisible. Like, he was not even showing up on the screen before Chris Jones started playing inside again. And so I feel like, yeah, he made a huge impact on them. He drives the bus and what they want to do defensively. And he gives a guy Spagnuolo a ton of options in terms of pass rush. I mean, Spagnuolo can get really creative when he knows he has four guys up front who can do a lot of different things. He can find the best matchup for Chris Jones. He can create that. And all of a sudden, yeah, Melvin Ingram, who, to your point, Pittsburgh Steelers were ready to get rid of him after 2 months in their franchise. I mean, if he was doing the things he was doing there, he would still be there. And so, yeah, all these guys have flaws right now, but they look more flawless because they're playing next to Chris Jones.
Is it possible it's a big step back without Chris Jones, more than you would think, more than just whatever Chris Jones is, because it's all built around what he does?
Yeah. I mean, when we watched this game on Thursday night, and I don't know how many quarterbacks the Chiefs have played who have the capability of Justin Herbert, not to just do damage with his arm, but to move around and do damage with his arm. I mean, you saw that big throw he made on the 70-yard play where he just rolled right and, obviously designed play and just bombed him up. where Justin Herbert can really hurt this defense is by stretching the field. The Chiefs have not had to stretch the field, have not had the field stretched on them throughout this stretch at all. I mean, Dak Prescott's the only guy you could think of who's really capable of moving around and making those kind of throws, and he's just gone south and is not trying to run at all. So I put Herbert in the same category as I put Josh Allen, where you saw him against the Bucs, where he can get you 24 points in a hurry, 27 points in a hurry just by being him. And so you look at the big plays that the Chargers had in that game in week 3. It was Herbert moving around, and all of a sudden you got Mike Williams up the seam. You look at 4th down plays where he's going to Guyton, a rope on 4th and 9. They're throwing the ball deep again. And Eric raised the point about contested catches. I think part of that was because they were playing so conservatively and throwing a lot of intermediate and short routes. Now they've decided, let's go down the field and see what happens.
Eric, 2 years ago with Mike Pinnell and Derek Nottie, we called it 2 fatties and a blitz, was what they went to when Chris Jones went down. Is that what we see here? Reid and Derek Nottie and the old 2 fatties and a blitz gets wheeled out here if Chris Jones and we've got one of the questions in the chat room about, can Chris Jones still play? He can. He's going to have to test positive, I believe, negative tomorrow morning, and then sometime Thursday morning, and he could clear the protocols. Or no, Jeff, do you know, does it have to be day before a game? When exactly you can have that second negative test 24 hours apart and still be able to play?
I think it's up to the time of the game. And so, but it's still like the window is so tight, asymptomatic and 2 tests within a 24-hour period. So I've never had COVID. I don't know how it works. I don't know how you can have it on Monday and all of a sudden be ready to go on Thursday. But I'm assuming both these guys aren't going to be ready to play. Unless these are false positives that we're talking about here. I think it's just it just seems unlikely that you're going to see both these guys on the field.
Yeah, and I think
go ahead.
Yeah, and I think they've done it without Jones before. They won the Houston game without Jones in 19, but obviously that was and he played sparingly against the Titans in the championship game. To me, the 2 fatties and a blitz thing I think works really well now, better than before, because what are they doing now? They're tackling, right? They're not, because essentially what you want to do is get somebody like Herbert to get the ball out of his hands and then make a tackle. One thing that the Chiefs really might have in their repertoire on Thursday is that Austin Eckler has an ankle injury that has kept him out of practice both Monday and I believe Tuesday. I could be wrong about Tuesday, but it's not appears to be serious, but it could be one of those things that keeps him out for a short week. Because I think Eckler is really one of those players where, and the Chiefs did this in week 3, where if you bring pressure and Herbert gets the ball out of his hands quickly, you better tackle. And I'm not worried about Mike Williams after the catch. I'm not really worried about Keenan Allen after the catch, Jared Cook either. I'm worried about Austin Eckler. And if he can, if he doesn't play, I think the Chiefs have I can't believe I'm saying this about a running back, but if he doesn't play, I think the Chiefs get a decided, mulligan for this Chris Jones COVID situation.
A couple on this one from the chat room that's up, and if you're watching us on Twitch or Facebook, I think even YouTube on our links, you can get in on the chat one. But we've talked about this before, and I'm going to take a shot that it's Vinny on this. But is it difficult to draft good edge rushers? That is one of the things where, if we're talking about like why do the Chiefs have to go out and get Frank Clark initially? Like, you look big picture, the answer is yes, right? Eric, you've covered this a lot, that it is one of the most difficult things to go get your hands on in the draft because they're easily identified and they go quick. That
you just said it, right? Like, it's hard for a team like the Chiefs to draft an edge because they're never picking in the top 10, right? And the thing with edge players is the position, like no position is easy to scout. But edge and running back are like the 2 easiest positions to scout. For edge, is the guy big? Is he fast? Is he strong? And was he productive in college? And that last part is only matters after you've checked the other boxes, right? So then you look at like a team like the Ravens who let Matthew Judon go, their internals, their NGS data, the speed stuff. Tyus Bowser was the guy in-house that they kept for $6 million a year because he met all the measurables on the internal stuff, right? And then they draft Jason Owe or Adafe Owe, and what did he have? Big, fast, strong. Was he productive in college? Not really, right? That was like where the Vikings got Danielle Hunter too. It's like that's where you got to get lucky. But for the most part, edge players who are taken after like the first 15 picks are mostly all terrible. LJ Collier was the guy that went with the Chiefs pick after the Frank Clark trade. So that's what's tough, is that like that position's important, and it's, if you're never going to be terrible, it's hard to select those guys. And that's why teams are desperate. The Raiders trading a bunch of things for Mac, the Vikings trading a 2 for an Ngakoue, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's why you see these things happen. Chiefs for Frank Clark, Niners for D Ford, like that. That's why, because it's a very scarce set of skills. It's easily identifiable. That's really hard to get.
And you can even flip it around to the O tackle side as
Yeah.
well, right? That's one of the reasons why the Chiefs weren't taking, a tackle last year, and why they went for Orlando Brown is that, Jeff, they didn't think any of them were worthy of actually playing left tackle, that were going to be there in the draft where they were going to pick.
Well, and I was going to make the point about left tackles. It's just that, or offensive tackles in general, there really aren't that many great offensive tackles in college football. And so a lot of these guys who do get drafted as edge rushers coming into the NFL, they're seeing mediocre talents across from them. They look a lot better than they actually are when they get to this level, when they're seeing real athletes taking them on. And so really the most skilled pass rushers in the NFL, after the guys we're talking about, the freak show guys like the Von Millers or the Chandler Jones, people of that caliber, you got to be good with your hands, and you got to know how to set people up. Frank Clark has gone through this in his career here, where it's just like you just can't always bull rush guys. You got to have some moves, and so that's where you really find out how talented guys are. And that's, in my mind, that's where you see the fall off in some of these guys that get drafted really high at that position. They just aren't equipped to survive week in and week out in the NFL against high caliber offensive tackles.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out, yes, there are exceptions to the rule. Jared Allen in the 4th round. There are guys, it does occur, but to consistently hit on those guys are pretty easily identifiable, both at the left tackle and the edge rush. And that's one of the things that makes it so hard. It's the winner's tax of not being able to get up there and get after one of them. Are we now confident?
By the way, what did the Vikings have to trade to the Chiefs to get Jared Allen? That tells you everything you need to know about how valuable that is. What was it? 2 1s and a 3, or 1 and 2 3s, or whatever that was, like that. Yeah. Like once Jared Allen showed the league he was a player, he was worth he was worth a mountain.
And Jared Allen, I mean, history won't remember this, but Jared Allen was a player at risk when they made that move.
Yes.
Because he'd had 2 DUIs in one off season. And so there was some real questions about Jared. And, so that deal was not for a guy that was like squeaky clean at that time. There were questions about, okay, did he have an alcohol problem? Could he stay on the straight and narrow? The Vikings cash big. He did. He played great for the Vikings. Has gone on to a Hall of Fame career.
There was a couple comments I noticed that I want to comment. And by the way, Aaron, thank you for the compliment on the drink and the drinkware, but also Temecula.
Temecula.
That's Temecula, California. So it's probably California.
Gotcha. The Chiefs are 11th this year in the NFL, 11th best in the NFL this year on passing yards to wide receivers on targets of 20 yards down the field or more, which I think, given what we saw in the first 5 weeks of the season, is a very impressive feat. If you just look at wide receivers in general, they're 9th, which is a little bit of a fall. In 19, they were 1st, right, in yards allowed to wide receivers. In 20, they were 2nd. So this year they've given up a little bit more to wide receivers, but I do agree with you. I think that's what the Chargers have to do, is throw the ball down the field to Williams and Allen and open things up underneath. I think that as Chiefs fans, you can rest, I think, a little bit easier in the fact that right now, since they've gotten the thing going in the secondary, they're just simply not allowing those kind of plays to happen.
Yeah, and that is, and if they're able to get L'Jarius Sneed, who Andy Reid said was on his way back to Kansas City, don't know if he'll play, what his mental state will be, but if they would get him back, they get even deeper along there in the secondary and have their full force for it. Jeff, have we seen now with this performance of the defense, or at least at a point that we say the Chiefs, we can call off the dogs on announcing that the Chiefs have to have a monster offense to get this done?
we're getting there. It's still, well, if they're going to play, if they play the way they played against the Raiders in the 2 games they played against the Raiders, it doesn't matter what they're doing offensively. They have enough to do damage when you're getting whatever it is, 7 turnovers on defense and you're scoring 89 points. It's just nobody's going to give you problems when you're playing like that. But if you're playing more like you were against the Giants or the Broncos or the Packers, where points were hard to come by and you were being you weren't having the kind of success defensively that we've seen against the Raiders, it's going to be a lot harder. I think ultimately, I saw Kurt Warner make this comment on our air earlier today that you get to this time of year, get to the postseason, your stars have to play like stars, and so whoever it is you're relying on to be a difference maker for you, those people have to step up their games. And so, yeah, well, I do think what they've done defensively is impressive and could go a long way if they can sustain that level. I'm just not sold on them or anybody else really playing at that level week in and week out without some help from someplace else.
Are you sold on the defense actually being better than the offense, Eric?
No. Like, I don't know if you guys listen to the Wednesday version of the forecast, but George was trying to advocate for betting the Raiders last week, and I talked him off of the ledge because I made the claim, and again, you can laugh at me if you want, but I did build a model to sort of like test if this was true, and it has been true. Andy, I think sometimes we mistake Andy not having a great year for Andy just saving stuff, right? And, when Belichick beat Buffalo on Monday night, somebody asked him a question, and he said, I didn't even show any of my pass plays. You know what I mean? And when I looked at that Denver game on Sunday Night Football, I think Andy took one look at Bridgewater and was like, this schmuck is not. I mean, it's the first team to 14 here, right? And so, held back a little bit. I think against the Raiders, when Mike Hughes ran that first touchdown back, I looked at some of my friends at work and I was just like, if you bet the overs on Mahomes, sorry, they're dead. I was just like, this game, and it was. He threw for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and it was basically like, we're going to win this game no matter what. I'm just going to run some vanilla stuff, and hopefully we can execute the vanilla plays, right? And, when you look at a graph of what I call scheme uniqueness, which is basically how much does your scheme deviate from the average, you can look at Andy Reid's history, and it peaks in the Ravens games. It peaks in the Buffalo games, and it has these troughs. And then in the 19th season, literally you saw the graph sort of come back up in the playoffs, right? He pulls out, and the joke is, it's like, oh, Andy, call the good plays today, right? But it's not that simple. But it's like, to me, I still don't think the Chiefs are calling the good plays, and I think that the defense being amazing is part of the reason why. I think they're intercorrelated. I think I talked to you guys last week about 19 and how Pat's stats were not great when they were winning those games down the stretch because the defense was carrying them. And I don't necessarily know if it's Pat being bad. It's maybe I think this year Pat's worse than he was in 19, but I also think combined with that, it's also the fact that they're not pulling out all the stops just to gain these yards and these touchdowns because their defense has given up nine points a game the last 3 games, straight.
Yeah, and I think the other, we talked about the D line, how they all fit together and how they all build on each other. But Jeff started out this year when Eric was still saying PFF and your model. I had the Chiefs at 3 or 4 in the power rankings, and they were 2 and 3 or 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, wherever they were at that point during the season, and was talking about playing complementary football. Jeff, we're seeing the complementary football here, right? Because when you can get a stop, you can play either more passively or more conservatively, I guess would be the better way. More conservatively, if you know that you can get a stop and you don't feel a need to force mistakes, but you also can take a shot when you need to. And we did see Mahomes against the Raiders take some more of those deep shots and have some success with it. Both of those things, you're empowered as a quarterback when your defense can play. And likewise, Steve Spagnuolo and the defense can dial up a blitz, and if they get beat once, it's okay if they feel comfortable that the offense is not going to be stuck at 16 points at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, all those things help, and what the Chiefs have not had to worry about over the last 6 weeks is really an offense putting pressure on them like they felt against Tennessee or Buffalo or even the Chargers or the Ravens back in the first half of the season. Like they just have not had to deal with, we got to score some points here. We got to make things happen. And so it will be interesting to see what happens when they are back in that position. I mean, this Chargers game has the potential of being what the Bills game was, and not so much of the overall outcome, but in what the quarterback can do to stress a defense and put the offense in positions where they actually have to start making plays. Because the best thing about the offense that we can say the last few weeks is that they haven't turned the ball over. I mean, they really have become more efficient, but it's also because they haven't had to really push themselves or to try to make things happen. And so I do wonder what happens when that dynamic is back in play for them, because I'm still not sold on, is this more about Mahomes being conservative or is it more about him just not playing at a high level?
Yeah, I do agree. I will say this, from a statistical standpoint, when your defense takes it away 5 times, there's only so many yards you can gain.
Yeah.
So and there's only so much clock you can eat because you've only got so far to go. But I do think it's a valid point. What will the Chiefs look like in a 0-0 turnover game, right? If they go against a great, well-coached team like the Patriots or like a Mike Vrabel Titans, and they're not getting the turnovers because they have 16 takeaways. Jeff prefers the term takeaway as a defensive guy. 16 takeaways as a defense during this 6-game win streak. I mean, that is a big part of it. I think it also needs to be pointed out, if you're like still waiting to see and commit all in on the Chiefs, 5 of the 6 wins have come at home. And now they go out on the road in a short week, and they finished with 3 out of 4 on the road. So, not to be, the Joe Bland sitting on the fence, we'll really know at the end of these 4 games. Because they will have played 4 on the road. They will have played a Charger team that there's nothing, I guess, although we may say back, well, they didn't have their left tackle, right? Like, I guess that could be, if they go and beat a healthy Bengals team, in addition to, like, at the end of these 17 games, I think we'll have a good feeling for where they are. But I think inquiring minds want to know, Jeff, where are the Chiefs on the Chadiha Power Index these days?
And my first power ranking ever.
Yeah.
And so
where would you put them now?
I would say, look, I think the Packers are the best team in the league. I thought that for the last month. I think the Bucs are second. I think those are the 2 best teams. I think the Patriots are still above the Chiefs. I think that they suffered from not playing last week, so you got recency bias going on. But I think the Chiefs are probably 4. I'd put them in the top 5.
4 in the NFL?
4th in the NFL. 4th in the NFL. For the NFL, yeah. I think, and then after that, you'd probably pick between Cardinals, Rams for that 5th spot. But that'd be my top 5. I just feel like the way, when I watch the Bucs play right now, when I watch the Packers play, I see teams that can hurt you on offense and on defense. The only thing that keeps me from picking the Chiefs higher is, and I said this before, and somebody screwed up my quote. Somebody said, I think Chadiha said the Chiefs aren't special anymore on offense. Look at what they have on talent. What I said was, when they're not playing great offense, they're not a special team.
Right.
What makes them dangerous is that Mahomes can kill you any down, any possession, anywhere on the field factor. And so when that comes back, they'd be the most dangerous team in the NFL. But right now, that dynamic exists in Tampa. It exists in Green Bay. Not so much so in New England.
Eric, where are they on your power index?
First.
They've never left first. They can't go down. They were first when they were 3 and 4.
So beautifully delivered. Yeah. So beautifully delivered. Before we move on, I want to
incredulous at the idea that you would even ask.
Well, I knew what the answer was.
Where are the Bucs at? That's what I want to know.
Bucs are second. Second.
Okay. Where are the Packers at?
Packers are third. And actually, Jeff, if you look at so my friend Ben Baldwin, who writes for The Athletic, he has these market derived power rankings. So basically he just takes the point spreads and uses them to derive a power ranking, and he calls them objective, right? Because in theory, the betting markets are, a bunch of opinions. So ultimately they're not playing favorites to anybody, and they have the Packers pretty low. And you've seen it in the markets, right? Last week they opened a 12.5 point favorite at home to the Bears. Game closed 11. People are betting the Bears in that game. But yeah, no, I have the Chiefs about 8 points better than the average team on a neutral field. I have Tampa Bay about 7.5, and I have Green Bay about 6.5.
All right, I want to get to real quick one of the comments here. Andy's vanilla play calling has led to the defense and their confidence. This is from Aaron. I'm not even sure how this adds up. Like how he has vanilla plays, therefore the defense is confident. But on the vanilla play calling, like I find this amazing from the standpoint of we spent the early weeks here on Red Gold and Bold talking about the fact that Andy Reid's got to vanilla it up a little bit, or Mahomes has got to take the vanilla options more often and just check down to the running backs. Right now he's done it. And by the way, I don't think they've had an incomplete pass to a running back in like a month, because like last game, I think it was 8 for 8 for, I think it was 60 some odd yards and a touchdown. They had we had the one game where it was 100 yards for Darrell Williams on his own, the last Raider game. I mean, vanilla works, right? Like that there should be no faulting. That's not a weakness for this team if they're just going to be throwing picks when they try to go long, is it, Jeff?
No, and this speaks to two things going on. One is the public expectation of this team, and one is their reality.
Yep.
And so Andy Reid has accepted their reality, which is like, we're putting the ball in harm's way too much. And so there is a lot of truth in what what is it, Aaron, what he just wrote, which is that, yeah, it's been more vanilla play calling, and it's allowed for the defense to take on more responsibility. And what I see when I watch this defense play is more of a sense of we got to make things happen here. We got to do our job. We have to set our expectation level higher. I was watching Get Up on Monday after the game, and Dan Orlovsky showed a play where Willie Gay was upset about a touchdown being scored when it was 38-3 and just throwing up his hands like, what are we doing out here? And he made a valid point, which is that's where the Chiefs defense is now. In terms of, they're getting upset when they give up scores and after the game has long been decided. And so you love seeing that kind of pride, that kind of expectation level. But I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think the public feels like, why aren't they scoring 40 points anymore? Why aren't they getting 70-yard touchdown passes on every play? Where is Tyreek Hill at? Where's Travis Kelce? Where are the 500-yard passing games? And that's just, I've said it before, that may not be their reality the rest of the season, just because they've had to recalibrate what they do to get on this winning streak.
I see it. I think we're getting the chicken and the egg wrong, though, right? Because I think, and I've seen this on the other side of the ball, where you have really good defenses and you come up for air in the middle of the season. You're like, why the heck is this team not good? Why is this defense not creating turnovers? Like, think about the 18 Jags with Bortles, or like the 16 Vikings with Bradford, or I mean, even the 18 Vikings with Cousins. Like, you take these brilliant defenses, right? The 19 Bears, right? Remember the 18 Bears, 12-4 turnovers, make the playoffs. The 19 Bears defense is basically just as good, no turnovers, 8-8, no playoffs. And you look, and I think to myself, well, if you're a defense and like I think back to like the 2011 Packers when they went 15-1 and they scored every freaking possession, and that defense gave up tons of yards, but what did they do? They got turnovers, right? They were aggressive, and that got them to 15-1. When the defense knows that the offense isn't just going to have their back, they play tight, and they don't get turnovers. They don't blitz. They don't because a 70-yard touchdown is it for you. And I think what we've seen with Kansas City is when their defense started to play well, the opposite happened on offense, which was the Chiefs offense isn't pressing because they don't believe anymore that they need to put up 35 to even have a shot, right? We watched the Browns game in week 1, and it's like this team had to score literally every single possession to make this thing work, right? And like, we would joke when like the team would get a turnover, we'd be like, oh, that's game because Pat's going to score on every drive. And they had to score on every drive against Philly. They had to score on every drive against Washington. And like, that's how the ethos was. And you saw pressing, you saw turnovers, you saw drops, you saw, pass sets that weren't very good. You saw Pat was jittery. And like the one thing you're seeing with Pat now, it's not overwhelming, right? It's not impressive. But Pat looks comfortable now. Like he looks comfortable in his own skin.
I don't know if I
22
agree with
points.
That.
I don't.
He looks comfortable.
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't
going to
think he
Eric
looks-
finish. No.
I don't think he looks frustrated or angry or like I think he's letting the Chiefs offense, I can best describe it as letting the game come to them now because they know that if they get a red zone turnover or they don't score a 70-yard touchdown, that doesn't mean they're going to lose. And early in the season, that meant they were going to lose. So I think it's the other way around. I think the Chiefs defense being good has given their offense license to try some things out, namely trying to run the football more and trying to be less risky and things like that. To me, that's what I'm seeing. But it's just the other direction.
Jeff, what does he have to do to look comfortable? Put on some slippers and
I just think he looks uncertain. And I think that's because he's playing a style of offense he's never played before. I don't see him standing. I think when Tom Brady plays in this style of offense, all right, I'm throwing the ball 4 yards to Leonard Fournette. I'm throwing the ball to Gronk in the situation. I think he's trying to understand how this works. I think he's doing well with it. I think he's having his moments, but there's also been situations where the best way I can put it, I think when you're a quarterback who's so used to being super aggressive, I think your timing, your instincts get thrown off. That's what I don't see the instinctiveness in him. I don't see the killer mentality. And that's why I think when that perfect example was that Dallas game when he tried to escape the pocket and Micah Parsons tracked him down. It's like that the feel for that kind of stuff is better when you're playing your kind of game. I think it's a little more off when you are trying to figure out, okay, we should just check it down here. Maybe this play's not open. Maybe I should try to go for the big play here. I think he's trying to figure that stuff out. And when you take that away from someone who's as alpha male-ish, as hyper aggressive as he is, I think it's harder. But I will say that what the danger in what's happening with this defense, and this is not a knock on what they're doing, they're playing really high level defense, is you have to go back to how this team was built. They were built to win with offense and with a defense that was competent. If you start saying the defense is so good, the offense doesn't have to be that good, are you tricking yourself? Are we making them out to be a better defense than they actually are? And in reality, they're starting to say, we don't need that much offense, when they actually still need that great offense to win a championship.
I don't think that's real. I don't think that's the risk, though. I don't think they're going into games being like, oh, we don't even have to be that good. I think it's more of we don't have to do too much. And I think I think there's a distinction between those two things.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying about the point about playing the Chargers.
Well, and to your point though, about like, I think how this team is built is actually the right way to build a team though. Right? Like because the team that's built to win 16-13 in today's game will always, they might, back-ass their way in at 10-7, 11-6, or get a schedule-driven, injury-free year that brings them home as the 1 seed. Kerry Collins and the Titans, right, that year. But then they get in there and you run into a guy, you're almost only up against Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and one of them gets hot and smokes you, or at least gets hot and takes the lead on you, and then you've got to play their style of football. I mean, I do think your point is very valid. Like if we were to sit here and say, okay, if the Chiefs don't win the championship, how does the game look? And I think how the game looks is they dig an early hole. The other team gets out in front, and then they come back around and pound the rock, and they're not able to play 6 defensive backs out there like they want to do. We've seen them against the Raiders play the game they want to play. That is their script. Get out, get up, get in front, and force them to go to the air. And I do think that, kind of like I said, we still haven't seen that big win in a heavyweight championship fight where, they took out one of the main contenders. When they've gone up against all the main contenders, they've lost. Now they're going to get that shot against the Chargers. There'll be an asterisk about no left tackle if the Chiefs do have a great day and pressuring Justin Herbert. But the Chiefs played last week without L'Jarius Sneed. They still got it done in the secondary. The Raiders thought they could throw the ball. They couldn't. But to your point, I do think that there is still that question mark, what happens if they run into that game? And what I think happens is the 2019 Super Bowl, a very competitive game that will come down to the last 7 minutes of the game, and the team that executes better on offense, will win the football game. And I don't think that'll be a team that's running out there playing great defense with Ryan Tannehill, right? I don't think Ryan Tannehill's going to beat you in the last 7 minutes. The Titans could have a day where they're +5 and have a pick six and a fumble return for a touchdown or a punt return, although everybody seems to subscribe to Eric Eager's approach to special teams, fair catch everything, and let's get out there and play offense. But, I mean, I think it is a valid point, but I don't think you can build a team that is every answer to every question that can be thrown at you. You build a team with the resources you have, as strong as you can, to the personality of and to the talents that you already have on the shelf that aren't going anywhere, and you round out that team the best you can. And I think we can say, at least at this point, it's looking like the front office of the Chiefs have done that, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess the point I'm making here is, if you go back to the start of this season, I think Eric and I, people forget this part of it with me, but I think we're both optimistic about this defense being better than it's been in the last 3 years.
Yes.
Now, what that meant, how we would define that, for me would have been, okay, they can consistently be around 15, 16, 14, 15, 16 in the NFL. So I would challenge you to find anybody who would have said this could be a top 10 defense in the NFL going into it. And so are they a top 10 defense? Because as we're saying for the last, were you the one saying this?
No,
you putting your hand up?
I would never predict. The one thing that I've always said, and it drives me crazy, is when a defense is bad, particularly in the town that I cover the team, Kansas City, there's always, if they could just get to number 20, if they could just be an average defense, which, history is littered with teams. It generally comes with a coordinator change, right? And that isn't the case here with the Chiefs. But history is littered with teams that went from god-awful one year to top 10 the next. I mean, there are some like bottom 3 to top 3 turnarounds in 1 year in NFL history. Defense is something like, without acquiring a Hall of Fame quarterback, you're not going to turn an offense that far, but you can turn a defense around in one off season. So did I say, Melvin Ingram plus Willie Gay plus this guy equals number 6 scoring defense? No, but I will tell you, the expectation of a fan base, and certainly the expectation of an organization, should always be to be in the top 10 defensively, because it's not that many moves away if you're a competent organization.
Well, and that's fair. The point I'm bringing up is just about recency bias. Are we absolving them for what happened against the Chargers and the Ravens and the Bills and the Titans? Or are we saying what they really are is what we've seen for the last 6 weeks against teams that aren't as offensively gifted as those teams were? That to me is the big question here, because it relates back to the question you posed at the beginning, which is, can they win doing this stuff?
And so does the Charger game answer that question? I mean, is this their toughest matchup? Certainly it is, since those teams that they lost to. But will this game against the Chargers answer that question?
For me, it does. And it's not, I keep going back to saying this, to me, it does not mean they haven't played great defensively. They shouldn't be praised for what they've been doing. It just means this is a different level they're playing at now. This isn't to use a Rocky III comparison. You're not fighting the challengers anymore. You're taking on Clubber Lang.
Right.
And so you're coming in, being able to let go of the stuff in the past where you were making the cologne commercials and rolling around with Adrian on the grass and feeling good about life and you got your ass kicked? Or are you coming in after being with Apollo out in LA, running the beach and living in the slums and ready to fight? And so, I think it's imperative that they come out with a mentality of, I would say, even being an underdog, to be honest with you, because I think this team is playing like that, has been playing like that over the last 6 weeks, that they're coming in on a short week, which to me, 2 big factors that are going to impact this game because it's a short week. One is Andy's ability to scheme things up, the play calling. And 2 is the other side of it with Spagnuolo being able to trick up Justin Herbert. You give Spagnuolo an extra couple days, you got a lot more things you can throw at Herbert. Without that time going on the road, you lose some of that. Just as big as Chris Jones not being there is that dimension of being able to disguise stuff and keep Herbert at bay.
So which is it, Eric, that's more concerning for you? Is it this matchup with the Chargers, or is it the fact that Jeff can cite a movie where a multimillionaire has a driveway filled with Italian sports cars and washes them himself? Most asinine part of that Rocky III with Clubber Lang, Mr. T as Clubber Lang. No, I never could figure out, why is he washing the car himself? Like he's, I've got a huge mansion, but I'm still just a normal guy, like the old days, out washing my car in the driveway. When in reality, in the old days, he didn't even have a car. So anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like Frank the Tank in old school, like what is he doing? He just got married. What is he doing fixing his own car.
Yeah. Let's go. Make it happen. Is this the toughest matchup for the Chiefs? And does this answer all questions if they handle business on Thursday night?
It doesn't. Like, I'm still like the uncertainty is huge, right? I think Rashawn Slater is big. It is the biggest game for them, right? Like, I did the Steve Kornacki stuff. I sent that out today. They're basically, I think, 90% to win the division with a win, and they're like 30% to win the division with a loss. So it's big, right? I mean, because the Chargers would end up, and actually, there's an interesting. I got a question from somebody on the team. It was basically like, and this sounds really silly, but they're like, look, if we're in overtime with them, and we have a risky play, we're going to play for a tie, because a tie is actually like really preferable to a loss. A loss to the Chargers here is devastating for the Chiefs. So, that's sort of disheartening, because, we've won 6 straight games and everything's great and all this stuff. And it still comes down to a must-win game in week 15. But that's the reality of it. And if they do win this game, do I think it cements them? I don't think so. Like, I still think they have to prove it in January, of course, have to prove it in February, hopefully. But it would be another really encouraging sign. And again, that's where I am on the last 6 weeks. I think the last 6 weeks are extremely encouraging. They don't prove anything, but they're extremely encouraging.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. Herbert versus Mahomes. Is this Brady Manning? Are we watching the blossoming of Brady Manning, Jeff? Are these the two best young quarterbacks? Who's better in your mind?
I'm going to take my victory lap, because I called this last year when Mahomes was just light years ahead of every other young quarterback. And we were, not us specifically, but a lot of people were dumping on everybody else's quarterback. And I said, look, every decade, you're going to have 5 or 6 guys who emerge who are going to be just as good and be in this conversation for best quarterback in their generation, of their class or whatever. And now you're seeing Justin Herbert become that. And I don't think he gets enough credit, be honest with you, because the Chargers are an up and down team and you don't see them play as much because they're in the West Coast. But the things he can do are very Mahomes-like. And the way he's played, I don't know what the numbers, how they compare, but he's certainly playing at an MVP level this year. I think he's doing more with less around him than Mahomes has done at the start of his career, including the coaching aspect of it. And so, yeah, I feel like he is going to be a big rival for Mahomes, just as Josh Allen will be. Maybe Dak Prescott, if he can get back to where he was at some point. I think those guys are the future. Joe Burrow, probably in that conversation as well now, the way he's been playing in Cincinnati. But it's you look at what he offers, what he brings to the table. And I was talking to a scout about him earlier this year about why he took so much flack from people like Soren Petro when he came out of college. And he said, look, people forget that if he had left after his junior year, he would have been the first pick. There was no question about it. But he waited. The hype around Tua Tagovailoa got bigger. Joe Burrow came out of nowhere, and people kind of didn't dismiss him, but he dropped. And it dropped because people thought he was a nerdy guy who didn't care about football that much and was going to be another Andrew Luck type guy. And what he's shown is that he's super talented, he's super motivated, and super capable of leading that franchise to a level they haven't seen in a long time.
Let's pump the brakes just a little bit. I will wear it because he has been better than I thought he would be. I always caution when I break something down that I have not sat in a film room and watched every snap the guy took in college, like a personnel department will do and cut it up. And for anyone who hasn't heard this podcast before, I thought he looked a little gun shy. I thought there was some Blaine Gabbert in the guy, that he wouldn't stand in against the rush. And that has been totally wrong, right? Whatever little bits I saw at Oregon that looked like he was skittish, or would just unload the ball instead of standing and taking it. I mean, that kid warriors up. And I will give him all the credit. And I will 100% admit Jeff is absolutely right. I was dead wrong about that. But as far as waving the checkered flag on where he is today, and frankly, waving the checkered flag on where Patrick Mahomes is today, what did Matt Stafford's career look like 2 years in? It didn't look this good because he got hurt, I think, each of those first couple of years.
Wow.
He's battling injuries. But early on, he had a 40 touchdown season in his first 3 or 4 years when he was one of like 9 guys in the history of the league to have a 40 touchdown season. And, now he's finally at age 34 getting back to being an elite quarterback. Before then, he didn't win squat. And some of that has to go on Matt Stafford and Justin Herbert. That's why I think this is a giant game. Jeff, I think he loses this game. It's like, yeah, pretty numbers. That's great. But not one of the true elites, right? He's going to get dinged the way Phillip Rivers got dinged. The way Peyton Manning got dinged until he finally broke through and won the championship. Oh, bunch of numbers, but can't win, right? He's going to get dinged with it. But if he wins, I think there's so much at stake in this one game. If he wins, and particularly if he wins the way he did last time against the Chiefs, which was, I think, 286, 4-0, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, he vaults to the number 1 on the MVP list, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. Oh, without question. I mean, look, this game means as much to him as the Ravens game earlier this year meant to Lamar Jackson, as the Bills game meant to Josh Allen, that if you're going to be considered an elite quarterback, you have to be able to beat the best quarterback in the game. And, I'll push back on the Stafford comparison, being a guy who's followed the Lions his entire career. I know that Matthew Stafford never had someone like Joey Bosa or Derwin James or people of that caliber. He had Calvin Johnson, but he didn't have those.
The Lions drafted 3 tight ends in the first round for him. Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola, 2 left tackles in the first round, Frank Ragnow in the first round. We got to chill on the Stafford stuff. Yeah. The Stafford apologetics is going to end me too young.
All I'm saying is he didn't have the kind of team, the kind of full team, full roster of players. You can't name a defensive player they took during that time. Ndamukong Suh, who showed up before Stafford was there, right?
I mean, Darius Slay is great. Stephen Tulloch was really good. Ezekiel Anza was a pretty damn good player.
Ezekiel who? Oh, Anza. Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot him. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long was he there? 3 years?
They had Haloti Ngata on the team. They had
But he was 50.
Glover Quinn was really good.
I think you're both right. I mean, I think to Eric's point, there was a massive investment around the guy. They did draft good players. Clearly, they've never
put up numbers. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one good coach they got, Jim Caldwell, they fired. So listen, that start at the head of that beast. The problem lies with the Ford family at the top of that thing. That's the mess there. But I listen, and I'm not trying to say he is Matt Stafford, which, by the way, a lot of people would say that that's not awful. Not as many people are as down on Stafford as Eric Eager is, or was right before he's had a big game last night. A lot of people, maybe he's going to lead the Rams deep. He's having a great statistical year. I'm just saying, putting up some numbers. I mean, the guy was 6-9 last year, or what was he, 5-9 last year? Or 6-9, one or the other. He didn't play all the games. If he loses this game, he's 8-6. Putts your way home at 10-7 and say bye-bye in the first round of the playoffs, or miss it. Yeah. It's a real different view. I mean,
I think
Stafford-esque.
Yeah, I was gonna say he hasn't played well against top teams: New England, Baltimore, Denver, Minnesota. All these teams that are fighting for playoff spots, he hasn't played well against. So I totally give you that point.
But I do think the thing is with him is he dealt in Oregon with the same thing he's going to deal with in LA, which is that the offensive play callers he's had have not maximized his talent. Now the question becomes, and I hate bringing up Stafford, but when you're Stafford and it's like Joe Lombardi, who by the way is the offensive coordinator now for the Chargers, when it's Joe Lombardi, is it your fault or is it his fault? Oh, he gets fired. Then it's Jim Bob Cooter. Oh, is it your fault or is it his fault? And then it's what's his name? Daryl Bevell. Oh, is it your fault? And eventually you're the only one that's the constant in the entire equation. And so for Herbert, and this is what I wrote about at PFF, I was wrong about it. I didn't even think he was worth a top 10 pick or anything because at Oregon, I just saw Oregon was so physically dominant in the Pac-12, but they weren't getting the results. And I attributed probably more to the quarterback than I did the OC. Then he comes here and he gets Shane Steichen in year 1 and does pretty well. They get rid of him and they get Joe Lombardi. And so all things considered, he's handled that well. But if you actually look up at the average depth of target, Joe Burrow is throwing the ball a yard downfield. Joe Burrow, weak sauce, old arm or whatever people like to think, he throws the ball more than a yard downfield further on average than Herbert per pass.
And Austin Eckler is a lot that leads to that. They've got a weapon out of the backfield, and he uses it. I mean, on any one given year, Patrick Mahomes doesn't. If you look at this year, you're like, well, that guy didn't go downfield. Yeah. Who's this tired old fart? That's just.
But what I'm saying is the stuff with Herbert's interesting because when we watch him, we are enamored with him, and I think that's rightfully so. But when you come up for air, as you said, Petro, with a loss on Thursday, they're 8-6. And the question is always going to be like, why doesn't this stuff add up? For the same reason, we watched Detroit Lions football for all these years, and we all agree that Matthew Stafford's good, and we're like, why doesn't it add up? Or Minnesota Vikings with Kirk Cousins, the Washington football team with Kirk Cousins. We come up for air, and you're like, why doesn't this guy ever win? And I think the issue with Herbert's always going to be, like, can he take that next step? Because here's the thing about Pat. Pat's had his ups and downs this year. Pat's always won.
Yeah. And that is true. And we did a stat when Justin Herbert is sub 100, when he has a sub 100 passer rating game, which I know nobody likes passer rating in the analytics community, but Curtis looked it up. He's 1-6 with sub 100 or 1-5 in a sub 100 passer game. When Patrick Mahomes has a sub 100 passer rating this year, the Chiefs are 5-3. So there is a little bit of that, he finds a way to win.
Yeah. Well, right? They're also better coached too, right?
Yeah, I think sure. I mean, not according to, the football think tank or most of the football think tank, the entire NFL industry before 3 years ago. It was a boob who didn't know how to win the big game and couldn't manage a clock until he won a Super Bowl in Miami and a quarterback was blossoming on his watch, and now he's the get out of jail free card.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think if Justin Herbert had been gifted what Patrick Mahomes was gifted at the start of his career, which is Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, offensive line had been together for 3 or 4 years, a head coach who'd won 200 games in this league, that he would be the same place right now as Patrick Mahomes? Well,
I will say that the offensive line, you're overrating. Guard to guard, I think we've seen now was terrible last year.
But also the Chargers signed Brian Bulaga, they signed Corey Linsley, they drafted Rashawn Slater. Who's the guy from Feller from the Steelers is a pretty damn good guard. And Eckler's great. Keenan Allen is fantastic. Mike Williams is a top 10 pick. And they got Jared Cook, who I hate, but he's an okay tight end in the NFL.
And before that, they had the Arkansas.
But how many games did Pat Mahomes play as a rookie?
1.
But that's where I'm starting.
That's interesting though, because because that I think that strengthens my argument though, because Pat for 1 year sat, and Justin Herbert for 1 year played, and I think we'll all agree that Herbert being out there year one is a net positive for him, even if the line and the receivers and all that aren't as finished product as they are in year two.
I'll drop the mic on this one. Are you saying Patrick Mahomes should have played more in his rookie year, Jeff?
No, I'm saying that.
Is that what you're getting at? Are you getting at the fact that he should have been in the game against the Titans, that when they were 7-6, they should have made the switch? Because I'll drop the mic right now.
I'm saying he would be what Justin Herbert was after his rookie year, facing questions about can he win at a high level. And the point I'm making here is that Justin Herbert is now in his 24th game in the NFL, and that Patrick Mahomes came into a situation. Even the culture was light years away from what Herbert walked into with the Chargers. They've been in the playoffs for 6 out of 7 years before that. This team knew how to win and prepared to win.
Yes,
and so I think Herbert, while he does have to prove himself in this game, I think he's played at a high enough level to say his ceiling is really high in this league.
Your greater point of that Mahomes had a better situation, I will not argue. Right? Yeah. Now, if we want to argue about how much greater, I think, the investments that the Chargers
vastly
would you accept vastly greater, that the Chiefs situation was vastly greater than Herbert's?
They'd won 3 AFC West titles before he showed up.
Yeah, I mean, look.
But wait a minute.
Jeff pointed out specifically the weapons that Pat had, and I think the weapons for the Chargers are not as good, but not nearly. They're not a cataclysmic amount lower. The coaching staff is one. I think Staley's got a good head on his shoulders, but
I
he's
do
not what Reid is. And again, here's the difference. Pat in his first year as a starter, second year in the league, 12-4, and went to the AFC title game. We are currently discussing a Justin Herbert who just lost to Teddy Bridgewater 2 weeks ago, who lost to Kirk Cousins at home a few weeks before that, and lost to Mac Jones, a rookie quarterback. Ultimately, that doesn't look terrible anymore. We're talking about if Herbert's going to go from 10-4 or 9-5 or whatever it is to 8-6. Like, that's what we're discussing now. So I think a little bit of a recognition of like the gap between what Pat was in year 2 and what Herbert was in year 2 is I think what is reasonable here.
And listen, I don't care what the rules are as long as we're all going to play by it. You can't, in like episode 5 or 6 of this podcast, talk about how Chiefs fans are missing the boat when they talk about what they've been, or when Eric's power ratings talk about what they've been in years past, and you cite that every year is its own year, its own living, breathing year. Then you don't get to say, well, Patrick Mahomes, because of previous year's successes, is gifted this golden, throne to sit on, where poor old Justin Herbert has to carry the futility of the Chargers with him for the last 10 years. It's either the year is the year, or it's not.
So who was picking the Chargers to be anything last year when he showed up?
No one, and they weren't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they didn't have high expectations. They were starting Tyrod Taylor.
The odds for the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl in Patrick Mahomes' first year, the over-under on his season,
8.5,
was 8.5. And the kid won 12.
Chargers win total this year was 9, so it's basically the exact same expectation. Okay. The 2018 Chiefs were 30-1 to win the Super Bowl going into the year. The Chargers were right about there going into this year. It's like, the comparison's actually fairly decent, actually, and I would still side with Jeff in that the situation was better. The situation's better for the Chiefs. We knew less about Pat, so that's where you're averaging that stuff out. The situation for the Chargers is worse. We know more about Herbert. That's why the market was, fairly okay on them. But the comparison's not completely. I don't know. I like this. I think this discussion was fine.
I like the debate, and I think it's real because it is a debate. To Jeff's point, I think Herbert, certainly in this town, Herbert is sitting on, this idea, like, and I listened to the PFF forecast. You guys did the quarterback tiers, and it was Patrick Mahomes, and then no one was on that tier, right? There was another, and guys are talking about, well, it's really 2 tiers down till you get the next. And I think that's been Jeff's greater overall point, and I subscribe to that. I think it's hard for us as Chiefs fans, and maybe even those of us that just, when we're unbiased and cover the team, to admit that maybe there are quarterbacks out there that are a lot closer. Maybe Mahomes is still number 1, but that there are young quarterbacks out there that are much closer to him than I think Chiefs fans want to admit, because they don't want to believe, they still want to believe the idea of the 6 Super Bowls in 8 years are coming, right? And when you go, well, Herbert's legit, and he can stand toe-to-toe as he did in the first game, and he can beat your guy on a day. Fans don't want to hear that, and I think that's Jeff's greater overall point. I think he's right about that. It is much more of a fight, and I think it sucks, right? My fandom part, it sucks. I want butt fumble and what were the directs that were rolled out there in the AFC East for 2 decades against Tom Brady. I don't need the Chargers pulling their head out of their ass in 1 year.
Half the teams had Adam Gase as a head coach.
Yes. It's frustrating. It sucks. I don't want anyone any good playing for the Broncos.
To be fair, Gruden was the coach for Oakland, and then what was it? Las Vegas, LOSS Vegas.
Yeah.
All right, real quick before we get out of here, who wins this game? Jeff, you want to take the honors on that? Who wins? Chargers, Chiefs? What kind of score? What are you feeling?
I feel like the Chiefs have a lot of things falling in their favor these days, even with Chris Jones potentially being out. It's a big if he play, which I don't think he's going to play. But I think, what is this now, the 6th straight game where they've had somebody who they're playing against lose a significant player? I just feel like that's good karma for you. even on a short week, they found ways to win games. They're embracing winning ugly. I think they win this game.
Okay. The Chiefs, right?
The Chiefs.
Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, I make this game 3.8, which now the market's 3. So I think the Chiefs take this one here. I mean, I'm confident here. I'm not like, I don't think it's a lock by any stretch, but I really do think the Chiefs should outclass the Chargers in this one.
Yeah. I like the Chiefs in this game. I think it probably is more of a game because I think the Chargers are gaining confidence in this rivalry. And but I think the defense is real. We'll see if L'Jarius Sneed plays, if Chris Jones plays, if Slater plays. Those are all big things. But I'll take the Chiefs. But this should be, the beginning of what is the best rivalry, one of the best rivalries. It should take the place of Steelers Ravens. When Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin had them up, and every year that was a war. That's what this rivalry, I think, has the potential to be here moving forward. And certainly the quarterback rivalry is going to be a great one, no doubt. That's going to do it for us here on Red, Gold, and Bold. By the way, Too Deep, our NFL podcast, coming your way tomorrow. We're going to do that on a Wednesday because some of us have to cover the Chiefs game on Thursday night. So we'll do that on a Wednesday. Normally it's on a Thursday. So join us for our 2D podcast. If you haven't checked it out, check it out wherever you get your podcast. We'll be streaming that live at 9:00 tomorrow. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network and NFL.com, check out his incredible work at both those locations. Eric Eager, you can find his great work at pff.com. You can find me at 810whb.com. Thank you for joining us here on Red, Gold, and Bold.